Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to today's Dementia Researcher Salon. I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Program Director for Dementia Researcher, and I'm so pleased that you could join us for this conversation on a topic that affects all of us every day, in the lab, in meetings, in clinics, in the field, listening and communications. Our speakers today are Soumilee Chaudhuri, from the PhD candidate from Indiana University School of Medicine, and Dr Russell Chander, who are both there. Hi, everybody. You can turn your cameras and mics on. Who's from the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging at the University of New South Wales. Together, we'll explore how strengthening listening and communication skills can improve collaboration, deepen impact, and build trust in your research. Whether you're working with participants, or if you're in a lab and all you have are colleagues and cells, or if you're working with the public, how we communicate shapes not only our work, but also the experience and trust of others, which is even more important than ever in this time in the world where there's a mistrust of science and of research as a whole. Being able to communicate is so important. So today we're going to talk about how these skills can help you become not just a better researcher, but also a better collaborator and advocate for your work. So for those who haven't been here before, the salon works quite simply. We have two brilliant guest speakers who I've introduced you to already, who've been given a very broad brief of what they can talk about. So I don't ever quite know what direction this will go. We'll see. They'll each take a turn at presenting for 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have a chance to we'll have a conversation, and we'll have a chance as well for you to put your questions to them, and also as well share your experiences, which you can do at any time during the chat. You've got the Q&A there as well, the button at the bottom with the question mark in it. Or the other tab along if you're watching this in the app, if you want to ask questions or just share your own experiences and tips in the chat as well. They're always very welcome. And if you're feeling really brave, we'd love to welcome you to the stage where we can turn your camera on and you can come and share your experiences as well at the end. But that's enough from me. Russell has kindly agreed to be our first victim, and Russell is going to present first. So over to you, Russell.
Thank you, Adam.
Screen. Yep, we can hear you. I'll stick around until we know your screen share is working.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we certainly can. Thank you very much, Russell.
All right, great. All right. Thank you for the opportunity to have a word with you guys today. My name is Russell. I am a postdoc research officer for the Centre of Healthy Brain Aging in Sydney, and I'm here to talk about maybe some a bit more of a slightly technical approach to communications and listening styles before we head on into a more general discussion about communication. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the since I'm me coming from Sydney, Australia, which is 5 a.m. here, by the way. It's I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I come to you from, which is the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to all Indigenous elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Indigenous peoples that might be attending with us today. So a little bit more about me. Like I said, I'm a postdoc at Chiba at UNSW. I got my PhD in psychiatry in 2022. Before that, I got a bachelor's in psychology and communication. So I double majored in 2013. And I highlight that communications bit because that's part of my education I don't really get to use a lot ever since I got into dementia research. But I like to leverage some of that knowledge today and talk about some perspectives that we can approach and think about our communication styles and our audiences when we talk, right? So today we're going to be understanding the different ways that we can characterize the communication styles and mediums, and also the audiences that we communicate with, and approach that from a comms perspective, and maybe discuss some tips for each style. Yeah. So I'll start off with a basic discussion about the general model of communications. No matter, we do communications all the time, be it like talking to our friends and family, presenting our work at a conference, writing a paper, texting someone, even leaving a note. Any time when you have an idea that you want to express to someone else, that's communication. And it all kind of boils down to a very general overall model where you have an idea in your head, and the objective is to get your idea from your head, the communicator, the sender, over into the other person's head, the receiver, the audience, or other people, right? So how that happens is that your brain encodes that idea into a message, and then you go through the communication channel to send that message over to the receiver. And the communication style can be different, can be word, can be text, can be voice, can be video, blah, blah, blah. May or may not have some noise in it, literally or figuratively. And then overall, ultimately, the message goes to the other person. And then the other person decodes that message, and it becomes an idea in their head. And so now the idea has reached their head, and they form whatever notions they have in their head, some thoughts, and then from there, they would get feedback about a response from the idea, feedback, right? So you encode that feedback, and again, it goes through the communication style or the channel, maybe a different channel from before. The feedback goes to back to the communicator, which is us, and we decode that back into an idea. So when I made this, I made the fonts for the sender and the receiver different in a sort of way to illustrate that sometimes the message can change with communication, be it because of like the noise in the communication channel, characteristics with the receiver. Sometimes messages can be misinterpreted, misconstrued, rejigged, realigned, repurposed, whatever, right? Which leads us to the very general thought in communications that what you say is different from what they hear. This is a mantra that we must always hold, right? Due to different factors with the communicator, the channel, the receiver, but we're talking about the communication styles and the audience, the factors for those, and how we can think about those things and adapt our message so that we can minimize the amount of translation error, right? So we can think about communication styles and communication methods in different ways. We can think about them in terms of synchronous versus asynchronous communication. Synchronous communication is what we're doing right, like for example, what I'm doing right now. I'm talking to you in real time for everyone who's watching, right? So what I'm saying, you're hearing it in real time, plus minus a few milliseconds of lag, but generally in real time, right? That happens face to face as well, even when you're chatting with someone online. And it's because we are sharing this space, this time space, we're also sharing the communication context. So there's a lot of like familiarity and commonality with each other. We're all attending the same online sphere, talk together. We all heard the same intro by Adam. And so we have that commonality, and with that commonality comes a lot of back and forth and a bit of feedback as well. We can do our best to use that feedback to enhance the message and take advantage of that common space, the common environment. If you engage in asynchronous communication, that's when communication happens one side at a time and the receiver receives the message at a delayed rate. That happens in emails, recorded videos. Like, for example, anyone who's watching this VOD right now, I may have recorded this like hours ago or days ago, right? So you're not watching it in the same context as me. So your context might be different. You might be watching it on your bed, on your phone like that, or you might be having it playing in the background while you are doing your work and just listening in. Whatever the case is, the communication context is different. So as the speaker, we have to do our best to maybe account for that different communication context and understand that people taking in this message might not be doing it in the same way that we are giving it. So we have to account for that difference, right? And that we can do that by making our message as clear as possible, and structuring it well so people can sort of follow that flow. We can think about communication in terms of monologues versus dialogues. Monologues is, for example, what I'm doing right now. It's very one-sided communication. I'm talking, there's no real feedback happening right now. It can happen in chat later on, but it's delayed. There's no active feedback, right? So when we write journal articles, press releases, that kind of stuff, it's similar. Those are all monologues. So because there's no active feedback, there's no chance to kind of like gauge and interpret and rejig our message accordingly. So we have to focus on making the message as clear as possible when we give it. So the clarity, the pacing, the structure will help to maintain that focus and that meaning for the audience. It's different from a dialogue where you have two people talking, interacting with each other, even in a group setting when there's a lot of people. Whenever you talk to someone or one group of people, that's a dialogue because there's an active change and exchange of ideas and feedback, right? Even if they're not saying something, their nonverbals will give you some sort of feedback. So whenever you're in a meeting, talking to someone, giving a poster presentation at AIC, that's a dialogue. And so that active feedback is very useful for us, and we should do our best to leverage that interpersonal connection to help maintain their relatability and focus, and also adapt the message in real time according to the feedback that we get. If we're giving a poster presentation to someone and we see that they're a bit confused with something, maybe we can adjust and go back and clarify and explain a point that we did before, and then continue on from there. Or if we see that their focus and their interest is somewhere else because of their expertise or because of their attention to something else, like maybe they're more of a methods person than a pathophysiology person, you want to spend less time talking about the disease that you're looking at and more time talking about the method at which you're modeling, right? So you can adjust your message on the fly because of that active feedback, right? And then there's something that I call a multi-log. I'm not sure that's a real term, but I'm calling it that. That's a unique situation where you get multiple parties kind of shouting their own ideas over each other. You kind of get this very commonly in like online forums where everyone's kind of posting and giving responses. So this is a more unique case where every person in that space is both a sender and a receiver simultaneously, both attempting to send their message while taking in all these other messages at the same time. So it's useful to think about these people the way that we think about ourselves in this situation, having a message to put out there, but also having very limited bandwidth to take in all these other messages. So it's very hard to take in long messages. So the key to this is to make short, succinct, punchy messages that can grab people's attention, because that's more important in the beginning at least. Once you can grab people's attention and break over the general noise of the environment, once you have their attention, then you can start to go into details and give your full message. We can also think about communication in terms of unimodal versus multimodal communication. Unimodal communication is communication where it comes through one stream, like just text, just voice, just one type of stream of information, right? So you can imagine something like that having not a lot of space for context or subtext. Anybody who's tried to tell a joke or be sarcastic over text message knows that this is very difficult. So when we do unimodal communications, we have to do our best to go with a logical flow and focus on the content speaking for itself, and avoid subtext and avoid people assuming the context or knowing the context non-verbally, right? And this is different from multimodal communication, where communication comes in multiple streams, like what I'm doing right now, right? Even though I'm talking to you, I'm giving you communication like this, I'm communicating more with just than my words. I'm using my tone of voice, my facial expressions, body expressions, the way I'm dressed, even all that's communicating something. So I have a lot of avenues to communicate nonverbals to give you more context and subtext. So if you know I'm being sarcastic, you know it because you can tell because of all this additional information, right? At the same time, we have to understand that while this multimodal communication can be very useful, we have to be aware when it's contradicting itself and giving mixed messages. If I were to give a talk about gendered violence in the workplace, it's a very serious topic. I'm very serious. It's serious topics, serious points on the board. But if I'm doing that wearing a t-shirt that says FBI, female body inspector, that's not going to be very helpful. And that's a conflicting statement. So we have to be sure that our multimodal communications are in line with each other, consistent, to avoid mixed messages. And when we talk about our messages, we can also talk about the styles of persuasion. There's generally 3 types: logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos is the appeal to reason, which is what we usually would do in academic settings. We convince the audience and tell them what they need to know using facts, statistics, and logic. So like I said, we use this for the most part, but in and of itself, logos alone might not be enough because we need to hook people in. And then that's why you use the other types of persuasion as well. Pathos, for example, is the appeal to emotion, getting people to feel a certain way to get them on your side. Anybody who's watched a UNICEF advertisement about, starving children that need your help, that's an emotional appeal. And it's useful to get that to hook people in, to get them invested, but shouldn't be fully relied on. In the same way, you shouldn't fully rely on ethos, which is the appeal to authority, demonstrating your trustworthiness and your expertise on the matter, just to tell people that you should be someone to be listened to. Me saying that I have a degree in communications is, for example, an ethos argument. It's to be used sparingly. It's an easy way to command immediate authority, but it can leave people open to bias and switching off their rational thinking. So that's something that should be used sparingly. Now we can also talk about audience types, and we communicate with different types of people in our careers. And one thing we can think about is intended audiences. We have primary, secondary, and hidden audiences. So to use the example of, you're a neuropsychologist, you're at a neuropsychology breakout session at AIC, you're giving a neuropsychology talk. Your intended audience, your primary audience, your intended audience are other people who would be interested in that field. So other neuropsychologists or neurologists that have neuropsychologists in their practice or who want to engage in that content. Your secondary audience are people who may encounter the content but not actively seeking it. For example, random occupational therapists that come into your session because they didn't have any other session to go to and they thought maybe we'll give it a go, right? So they're not actively engaging in that content, but they could. So it is useful to think about how your content can relate to them tangentially, right? And you get your hidden audience where people who are absolutely not your intended audience somehow get word of it. Like, for example, if someone were to record your session, put it on Twitter, it goes around academic Twitter for a bit, and then somehow escapes containment, and then randoms, non-academics somehow see it. This is why I have the picture of this person on the right over here. This is Dr. Ali Lukes. If you are paying attention to academic Twitter, you might know her. I believe if you go to Cambridge, you would know her. She went viral about a year or so ago, when she posted this picture on Twitter with her PhD. This is a PhD done post, posing with her thesis titled Olfactory Ethics, the Politics of Smell in Modern and Contemporary Prose. So it's obviously something to be celebrated. This post got out of academic Twitter and got to unfortunately, the more misogynistic side of Twitter. People started, giving criticisms about the conceived notions of academia, where it's going and how it looks into useless topics. People who say that academia is getting too woke, people who are a bit more misogynistic and don't, see the value of women in STEM and all that. And it got a lot of traction in a way that wasn't intended because it got to the hidden audience. And it's very hard to cater your message to a hidden audience because you, by definition, can't know them. You could think about how your message could be misconstrued by them, but you could also do what Dr. Ali Lux did, which is to be affable and not confront, but address people in a very civilized and non-inflammatory way, and in a sense defend your work, and then other people will also come to your defense, and in the end, because of that, a big line has been shone on her work, and people think about olfactory ethics all the time. You can also think about your knowledge, your audience in terms of their knowledge levels, like 3 E's: experts, enthusiasts, everyday people. Experts know a lot about your topic and don't need a lot of setup and background information to know about your topic. But we have to be careful because they may already have strong dissenting opinions, so we can't assume that they will be on our side, right? So we have to do our best to still engage with them and convince them, but not bullshit them. Not that you should bullshit anyone, but especially not them, right? You have enthusiasts, which are people that know a bit about your topic but want to learn more. These are the easiest people to educate because they're almost there. You just need to get a bit more. The danger with them is that they're what I like to call peak Dunning-Kruger. So the graph on the left is the Dunning-Kruger effect curve, right? Which is a hypothetical scale of how confident you are in a topic versus how competent you actually are in a topic. Generally, the more competent, the more you know about a topic, the more confident you are, with 1 or 2 exceptions. Anybody who's done a PhD knows that you get to a point where you know enough that you don't know a lot, and you just kind of dip in your confidence. But before that, if you know a bit and know more so than the layperson, your confidence peaks unreasonably peaks, and that's the peak of the Dunning-Kruger curve, and that's where a lot, not all, but a lot of enthusiasts are. So we have to take that into account, and then make sure that we don't skip over background knowledge for them and assume that they know everything, right? Because we might be able to fix some preconceived misconceptions with them. And then you got your everyday people, your lay people, who know a baseline amount or nothing about your topic. And this is the audience that you really want to reach out to when you educate them and spread awareness. And we all know not to engage them with technical details and jargon because we'll just lose them. We need to simplify our language, but also remember not to talk down to them, right? And treat them like 5-year-olds, right? And then very quickly, we can also think about audience alignment. We have friendly, neutral, apathetic, and hostile audiences. Friendly audiences are already on board with you. They already agree with you, easy to communicate with. You just won't get a lot of headway with them because, they're already sold. You're preaching to the choir here. With them, you could do something a bit different, like try out different communication styles to see if something different works. You can afford to be a bit risky and experimental with them. With a neutral audience where they don't have a preconceived notion about your message, that's the best bang for your buck when you're trying to focus on some people to convert and convince them of your message, right? We just have to be sure that, keep in mind that they may not actually be neutral. They just really haven't thought about your topic, but may have an opinion once they have to think about it. So we shouldn't assume that they are easily won over just because they don't know anything. The people that are a bit more harder to deal with are an apathetic audience. Students are sort of like this because they're kind of there against their will and that kind of stuff. They decidedly do not care about your message. Anytime you go into a public setting, this is the most common type of setting to find them, especially if they're there for some other purpose. So these people have a very short attention span. It's very hard to get them to engage. So again, the short, punchy, eye-catching messages will help hook them. And once you've hooked them, you can engage with them with the content proper. And then we have the hostile audience, which thankfully I don't think most of us will encounter unless you work in crisis management or you do some really dodgy research. These are the people that no matter what you say, they'll probably hate you and they'll probably disagree with you. Thinking about what these people might think might also help you to identify the holes and flaws in your arguments, and then maybe you can sort of address them proactively, right? But people in this case may be defensive, emotional. Some may be bad faith actors, and no matter what you say, you can't convince them. So tips to deal with people like this is to offer safe concessions and establish some common ground so that you can at least assuage their concerns a little bit. And worst come to the worst, if that doesn't work, just minimize dialogue so you minimize the amount of like criticism and negative feedback coming directly at you. Maybe take it offline. And those were the different types of communication styles and the audiences. And now that you know a bit more about how we frame these kinds of things, you can think about your styles and your audiences that you face and be able to use these tips to frame your messages accordingly. That's it. That's all I had to say for now. I'll hand over the mic back to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And delivered like a true communication expert. I think anybody who's watching this can take tips from Russell's excellent presentation. Thank you very much. That was really insightful. I loved how you brought in the science into that as well. It was a great talk. I'm interested because you work in quite a complex area. What's the hardest concept from your work that you've had to explain to a non-expert audience?
My work is more there's quite a bit of my thesis was on social cognition in older adults, and I think anytime you start to deal with a bit more psychological concepts, they start to get a bit more not tangible, a bit more conceptual. So it's always been a bit more difficult to kind of sell them on or sell that part of the research to them. It's the best ways to kind of, for example, social cognition is getting the skills that people need to interact in a social environment, how to have empathy, how to read people's emotions without them telling you, that kind of stuff, right? And sometimes it gets a bit high concept, so you just kind of break it down to simple language, use analogies, examples, real world examples. The fortunate thing is that everybody engages in social cognition and social interaction, so we can use their real world examples to kind of make it a bit more relevant for them. But,
yeah, I can see that. Analogies and metaphors are quite useful, aren't they? I think when you get into that, because people, you could say, imagine you're driving a bus to this location. That kind of helping paint a picture that people can understand, I think, is particularly useful. And storytelling methods as well, I think, storytelling techniques are becoming increasingly popular, particularly in qualitative research where you're wanting to bring that around. Thank you very much, Russell. Let's give Soumilee a chance to give your talk now. Soumilee, so you're not in the US right now. Are you somewhere else in the world? Have you had to... I hope we haven't ruined the time zone. Oh, we've lost your voice. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so sorry about these, but yeah, I had a family emergency, so I had to fly back to India earlier this week, and oh my God, that was an ordeal because they routed me through Rome, Italy, and it was a thing. But I'm not in the US now.
You can leave the airport, but not if you're trying to get somewhere else in a rush.
Yeah,
wow.
I know. I had to leverage a lot of my communication skills. To talk to the airport people. I don't think I was very effective. So yeah.
No, well, I hope it's not an inappropriate time of day for you, but thank you so much for still joining us this evening, despite all the hassle. Oh, over to you. I don't know. Are you using slides this evening?
Yes, I am using slides, and I just wanted to preface this by saying that Russell's presentation was so good. It was not just scientific; it was very, very clarifying. You knew the thought process and you knew what you had to do. So I literally took notes. So that was such a great presentation. Yeah. I loved it.
No, and I like the idea of taking two approaches. I love it when we get very different approaches to the same topic because they're all valid. And when you throw out there a really vague title like communication and listening, I mean, you can literally get anything back from that, couldn't you? So I love that we'll get very different takes on this topic.
Yeah, and I hope this is, kind of touches on a lot of things that Russell discussed, but also quite a few things that I think is important from a trainee perspective. Okay, so just kind of wrapping up a lot of the things that Russell talked about, I approached this from a trainee perspective. So thinking about things about communication and listening that they don't really teach you in the lab. For me, when I was an undergrad, there was very little we learned about communication as a STEM major. And then as we went into the PhD, and I'm currently finishing up my PhD, there was even lesser that we learned about communication. But there is more emphasis now currently with, the mistrust in science that Adam talked about. So the way I approached this talk was, as a trainee, listen first and then communicate, but do communicate. But what I wanted to talk about was this diagram that I made a couple of weeks ago, where I was trying to talk to my neuroscientist friends about how communication and listening is important. And I was trying to give them an analogy that I know we talked about with, in Russell's talk. But the way I was viewing listening and communication is when you're working on a data as a PhD student, when you have these cool ideas where you made this cool innovative method, these are like neurotransmitter vesicles in your axon terminal. They don't actually get released into the world. So for you to actually have that action potential, to have that synapse, to have that impact, you need to be able to communicate those ideas. That's how your neurotransmitter release should happen. And they loved this analogy. And I just wanted to bring this forward too, is that if you look at a synapse as the impact you're making on the world, you really need to release those ideas, that data, the neurotransmitter, into the synaptic cleft. That's how you're making an impact in the world. And the biggest thing to remember is when you are actually working on that data, you have those ideas, don't think of communication as a side dish. As a PhD student, that's, what we're doing. We're working on this stuff. We're working long nights. And we're thinking of communication. We're thinking of listening as a side dish, as a soft skill. It's not. Essentially, the way we should think about listening and communication is it's that bridge between the data points and the long nights that you're working and success. And success can mean many things with respect to impact. So the way I think of it here is it could be your impact on grant approval. It could be your impact on published papers, on promotions. But you need to release those neurotransmitters. You need to communicate your skills. So that comes to the first point that I want to make is as trainees, sometimes we don't think the science we are doing or what we have to say is impactful enough to be communicated. Once we go past that idea, the second problem comes is we do not really know how to communicate it. We're working on typically very, very nitty-gritty of stuff, and we don't really know how to communicate that. And some of the things is you cannot really study those problems. You need to be able to tell the world, the reviewers, the communities, why they're important. Some of the biggest issues that I've noticed while communicating my science is internally, I think it's super important, but I haven't been able to explain it to my grandma why it's important. And that's a big no for me. I work on Alzheimer's disease. And if my grandma doesn't understand what is the work I'm doing, why I'm doing it, that's a red flag in my communication skills. So I have worked over the years to make that happen. So when you're communicating, make sure you're communicating at the level of the audience and tailor it to the audience. The last thing is listen. When you're listening, listen to words, pauses, and listen to silences. So I know a lot of us in academia, we only go by the feedback we receive. What we should do is go beyond that and look at body language expressions. And you're listening to folks. So before you communicate, listen to people and listen to not just what they're saying, but also in another way, what they are not saying. Some of the tips and tricks that I use, and I don't know, let me know if you can see the next slide. Are you guys able to see the next slide?
Yeah, we've got that.
Perfect. And this is what I kind of wanted to end with is these are some practical tips for trainees who are super busy working on data all day, trying to please committee members, trying to be postdocs, trying to find academic positions. As these are some tips that I use currently that I've been using over the last 2 years to actually improve my communication skills, to improve my listening skills. First, try this once a month. Explain it to a 5th grader. or your grandma, or like someone in a very different academic field. So like, you know, for an anthropologist, or even someone like, you know, an oncologist that does something very different from what I do, which is dementia research. A very good way of doing this is looking for 3-minute thesis competitions, which are specifically tailored for PhD students talking about their thesis to a non-technical audience in 3 minutes. So first, try these things once a month. It cannot be like you're trying to do this every day, but once a month, try to explain a topic that you think is really complex in your field, as if you're explaining to a 5th grader, maybe your little nephew, or your grandma who has no absolute idea what you do, or someone from a very different field who still has some technical expertise. The other thing that I use is, when you're talking to someone, when you're replying to someone, summarize what they said. And one of the biggest thing here is you are letting them know that you listened and you're bringing clarity into the conversation. I try to do this in my lab meeting when let's say I'm replying back to my PI, or I'm replying back to someone who asked me a question after a presentation I gave. I try to summarize what they said, not just for the audience, but also it gives me space to think. While I'm summarizing that thought, I'm also listening to what they might have actually said that I've missed the first time. So before replying to someone, summarize what they've said. Try to do this in your weekly meetings with your peers or even with your PIs. Try having a 30-second or 3-second pitch of who you are. This is what I call a personal introduction. This personal introduction is actually about the professional work you do, but it's personal to you. And change this once in 6 months. And that will actually help you understand how your research trajectory has changed over the years. The fourth tip that I use, and I learned this pretty recently, do I use it a lot? Am I trying to? I'm trying to use it a lot. But replace filler words with silence. And this is super hard to do. I've probably have violated this rule multiple times during this presentation, but this is something to keep in mind, is try and replace filler words with silence, and that is impactful. Also, something that has really been helpful for me is finding mentors in communication. TED Talk speakers you follow, professors who speak with clarity, motivational speakers. These communication mentors can be different from your research mentors, but find them. This could be people from your field. These could be people from a very different field. But find them, talk to them, listen to how they're talking. Also, I'm someone with ADHD, and sometimes I just zone out and I don't listen to people, and I want to listen to them and I want to ask them questions because they are talking about something very impactful, very, very interesting, but I zone out. So for me, it's really, really, I think it's very responsible of me, is I actually ask them like, hey, I'm really sorry. It would be great. Could you repeat some of your major talking points? There was a fleeting thought in my brain that I missed that I would really like to ask you, but I want to revisit what you said. So I know that takes a lot of confidence, and it has been taking a lot of confidence over the last years for me to pitch that question. But I would really, really urge you to, for folks who have fleeting attention spans, to actually try that out. Maybe try it out once a week, maybe try it out once and see how that goes. So from a practical perspective, as a trainee working on research all day, trying to please committee members, these are some practical tips I actually use to try and be a better communicator, to try and be a better listener. And that's all I have to end with.
Much. I love your practical tips. They are genuinely really helpful. Particularly, I don't know, we've all been to those talks as well, haven't we? And I don't know if I can say this, because the recording of this will be out there forever. But I've definitely been to conferences where I found that neurologists, particularly, I feel in the dementia space, you can stop sharing your screen now. Neurologists, particularly, can be really great at giving the driest talks, and I feel like that particularly they could benefit from some communications training. I've then been and watched. I think there's a balance to be struck between giving a TED talk, you know, one of those uber confident people who goes on stage and has presence, which I don't think you're necessarily looking for that at a conference, but being able to raise your voice and lower the tone of your inflection of your inflection of your voice and things makes a difference. And there's a stat somewhere that says 30% of students now are offered communication training. Have either of you been offered communication training? Was that part of your PhD? Did that even come up at your institutions?
So formally, no, we don't have a communication training, but I will say though that we have had workshops where someone has been brought on to talk to PhD students about communication skills, but not just PhD students, but academics in general. There is Bree McWhorter from, I think she's at UC Davis. She is amazing. She runs a company called Activate to Captivate. And I have learned most of my communication skills from her. She works with scientists to be able to, talk very, very generally, but impactfully about their research. But as formal part of my curriculum, no.
I'm just distracted because I'm just looking back through. We have a great YouTube video on our channel, which is, I'm just trying to find it. It was a talk from somebody at Cambridge who is a kind of science communicator about how to give an impactful presentation. Oh, here we are. I found it. Somebody called Simon Hall. I'm going to post a link in the chat for you all. There we go. Actually, somebody asked a question. Have you got any tips for presenting a poster? Which is kind of, I like that. I think presenting a poster is a great first easing your way into it, isn't it? Particularly for a bit of an introvert, because it's usually a smaller audience. You know your topic really well. You get loads of goes at it, if because you can do it first of all, and then a new group of people or somebody else comes along, and you get multiple attempts.
Yeah.
What either of you got tips for poster presenting?
Russell? Yeah. Well, posters, like I do agree with what you said about posters being like a bit of an iterative process. I think the thing to understand and appreciate about poster presentations is that your first presentation is probably not going to be it. It's probably going to be a bit more rough and tumble even after preparation, and you will refine it over like multiple repeated times that you do the presentation. My suggestion for posters is that you should have maybe like a 2 or 3 minute spiel of how to present a poster, and that should be rehearsed. Someone just walked up to you and said, okay, just tell me, right? You can just give the almost automated spiel of introduction, methods, results, discussions, kind of like giving the main bullet points of how to go through the poster, and then from then on, you have a bit more of a discussion to when they have any clarifying information, they can ask you that. I think I also like to harken back to one thing I said in my slides before, where like in this sort of dialogue, you have an opportunity to kind of tweak the message in case you feel like it needs to be tweaked, either for future versions of this talk or just for this person because they need a bit more clarification on a certain topic. You can tweak that on the fly. Always be aware of when your message needs to be changed, and don't feel disappointed or offended if people aren't as interested in a certain part of your topic as you are. Like someone coming up to you and say they only care about the model, they don't care about anything else, even though you really want to talk about it, because everybody has their own different goals for communication. So the best thing you can do is cater your message to suit their goals as well as yours. But yeah.
I mean, if you've done your poster well, I mean, you could almost say nothing, right? I mean, that's the whole point is you walk away and people can get it from the poster. Which is why I think also with a poster presentation, it's not just about what you say, it's how you say it. I think if you're smiling while you're talking about this, you're enthusiastic about your work. I mean, if you come across as excited by it and talk about, so upbeat and you're smiling and you look approachable, I think it's hard for people to look at it for them. Enthusiasm's quite infectious, isn't it? It's kind of, if people can go, oh yeah, I see what you mean. I think, I don't know. What about you, Soumilee?
Well, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because that is exactly the tactic that I use during all my presentations. So going back to AIC last year, there are so many posters. So how do I make sure someone who comes to my poster actually listens to my talk and remembers me? And I was trying to network a lot. So one of the things that I did was try to be very, very exceptionally enthusiastic, because I had a really weird slot. It was end of the day, but I was still trying to be like, oh, hey, I know it's the end of the day, but please listen to me. I'm a student trying to get my research out. And that helped. But secondly, I was carrying a handout of my research. It was an abstract, and it also had a card that had a link to the paper, or like LinkedIn or my website. That really helped. And it helped because they were going on to other people, listening to their presentations, but it was only my handout and my card with them. And they could scan it and connect with me on LinkedIn. And one of them did. And, one of them had parents living in Korea, and I was doing work on a Korean cohort in dementia, and they asked me questions about that. So have a handout, have a link that they can scan. And that also is part of your communication skills, even if you're not saying that, but you are still communicating the work you're doing. So very, very important to have all these.
And if you create the QR code in certain places, you can get a record of how many people scan it. I think there are certain providers of QR codes. So if you're looking for impact, or you're not at your poster all day and you're wondering how many people, although that can equally work against you when you realize nobody scanned your QR code and you go, oh no. Pavitra, we actually had a session on developing and presenting a conference poster back on the 14th of May. And if you look in the app or in your website and scroll back to past sessions, you'll see we have a dedicated salon session in there where Sarah, Naomi James and Sophia Marcoloni presented on that topic just a few weeks ago. And next week's salon webinar is on developing an abstract, which of course is again another form of communication. But I think we're nearly out of time already. It's gone so quickly, but because we started a bit late, a few technical hitches. But I've given a talk a couple of times now to undergraduates over the last few weeks through the NIHR's kind of program to encourage undergraduates to think about research careers. And one of the things that comes across from giving that talk is how important communication skills are, and to practice these, because it's going to be, going out of your way to develop your communication skills is going to help you throughout your research career. Because whether you've got to communicate with the public to try and persuade them to participate in your research, or to disseminate your findings of your research, to communicate with colleagues and with supervisors to get them to buy into your ideas or where you want your research to go, or to bring them on board with what you'd like to do, the next experiment you want to do. Research funders, of course, who you've got to communicate with to get the idea across because you want them to fund your research. Or when you apply for a job and the committee's sat there and you're trying to communicate with them that you're the best person for the job, these skills are worth going out of your way to develop. A dementia researcher, we're happy to help you build those skills as well. We're always looking for contributors to write blogs for us. That's always a good way to start raising your public profile and to write things that will be found. Or come on the salon and present, because let's face it, there's only a handful of people watching this live tonight. If you can't come here and give a great talk like Soumilee did, this is a great first way to present. And to help refine those skills as well. So do drop me a line. We're always looking. We're about to launch actually in the next 2 weeks, sometime before the mid-July. Before we go off to AIC, I'm going to launch the call for our next round of talks. At the moment, all of our salon talks are scheduled right through to the end of September. But we don't have anything booked or decided from September onwards, which is making me slightly anxious. So Soumilee and Russell will definitely be back, because this is, I think Russell's been with us 3 times now. This is definitely Soumilee's 2nd time, I think. You came right at the very start. You were our first salon session on sexism in academia, weren't you? You were.
I hope I have honed my communication skills from then to now. So
I honestly, you were great then, and you were great tonight as well. Anyway, we always round up these sessions. We're out of time, but we always round up these sessions by asking the friendly AI that's been trained on content from the Dementia Researcher website, not from the internet, just from the content on our website, where we do have over 3,000 pages of supportive content, everything from blogs and podcasts and webinars, and all those have got transcripts as well, written by hundreds of people over the 6 years that Dementia Researcher has been going. So we have an AI that's been trained on our own content, and I asked it to give me 10 top tips for improving listening and communication skills, and this is what it gave me. Number 1, listen without intent to reply and listen to understand. I think that's an important one. Number 2, use plain language when it adds clarity, not when it removes meaning. Number 2 was ask open-ended questions to deepen your understanding, particularly important for qualitative research as well. Number 4, acknowledge emotion and context, not just facts. I think that's a good one. If you're supervising students and things, you know, important to bring in that personal side of things. Number 5 is check understanding by summarizing what you've heard. That was in Soumilee's top tips as well, I think at the end there. Number 6, be mindful of who is not speaking and why. So that's a good part of listening. Particularly if you're running a patient and public involvement panel, I think that's always a good place to look at that. Number 7, practice explaining your work to somebody outside of your field. If you can get your mum and dad to understand it and not just think if you're a neuroscientist and assume you're a brain surgeon, which is the usual thing, isn't it? Oh, they do something. Then you're doing a good job. Number 8, treat every communication as an opportunity to build trust. Number 9, give feedback on how you come across. Get feedback on how you come across and then act upon it. I always remember my first ever presentation skills thing was about people having their hands in their pockets. Don't have your hands in your pockets and look people in the eye when you're doing it. And I think particularly people with traits of ADHD or autism, we tend to look everywhere other than the people that you want to be looking at. And I know these days many of us are somewhere on the spectrum, and I think that's a skill of being able to look people in the eye to show them that you're listening. Number 10, last but not least, remember, communication is not a skill. It's not a talent. It can be remember, no, I'll get this right. Communication is a skill, not a talent. It can be improved. Even some of the people who, you know, not natural communicators, you can learn it, and it comes through practice. I'll tell a personal story. I once, to round this off, I was once dropped in it, or left in the lurch. I don't know if that's everybody in the world will understand that term, but I was very last minute asked to deliver a presentation in place of somebody else who was supposed to do it. I got told at like midnight the night before this talk had to be given at 9 o'clock in the next morning, and they just sent me their slides like an hour before. They told me, don't worry, it's fine, it's only a handful of people. And it turned out not to be. It turned out to be a room full of people, with some of the most senior people from this hospital were there. All the hospital board were there, the chief exec, the chairman, all the senior clinical leaders. And I had the worst car crash presentation of my life. I was hyperventilating. I think I read out this entire 1-hour presentation in about 10 minutes flat and couldn't get away from that lectern quick enough. And that put me off presenting for years afterwards. I could not. Every invitation I got, I took away, did not want to do it again. And it only takes time. So even if you get put off, you've got to get straight back on and just build back up your confidence. Don't be deterred. Communication is definitely a talent, not a skill and not a talent, and you can get better at it with practice, and be prepared, which I definitely wasn't. Thank you very much, everybody, this evening. Our incredible Dr. Russell Chander, who's back again, and I think Russell might even be back again before this run finishes. I don't, maybe not. And Soumilee Chaudhuri again. I don't know, Soumilee, are you back again for the end of the year? I feel like I've seen your name on an... No, maybe not then. So we'll be back next week with, as I hinted at earlier, developing a conference abstract where we have Sarah Zadani and Wasia Bogan who are here. And you won't have the benefit of me. We're going to have a guest host, Lucy McIntosh from University of Hertfordshire, who will be guest hosting next Wednesday at the same time as this one. And that's on developing a conference abstract. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, Russell and Soumilee. Great communicating this evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.